Welcome back to Recruiting Blitz. My name's Tim Verghese. We appreciate you guys tuning in. You might notice my setup back here is a little different. We're in Indianapolis for the start of this week for the Rivals 5-Star Challenge. So be sure to check out our work. We're at InsideNebraska.com and Rivals.com for our coverage from what should be the recruiting event of the summer. We've got 100 of the top 26, 27, and 28 prospects in attendance, including 2027 Nebraska quarterback commit Trey Taylor competing at the Indianapolis Coast facility. We're going to have coverage on some of the top recruits in town. We're going to have, just an opportunity to see these guys in action going up against each other on Tuesday. An awesome evaluation opportunity, awesome opportunity for, someone like Taylor, who's been working a lot this offseason to kind of see where he's at, how he stacks up against some of the top 26, 27, and even some of the top 28 quarterbacks in the country, while also throwing to some of the best 27, 28 receivers in the country. So we'll have plenty of coverage over the next week from Rivals 5-Star. But I wanted to get into just this past weekend for Nebraska, where things kind of stand coming out of June. Official visits are over. The dead period is kicked in. That doesn't mean recruiting news is slowing down anytime soon. Nebraska, of course, picked up the commitment of 4-star tight end Luke Sorensen on Friday. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with this recruit, with this player, what exactly Nebraska's getting, I want to just kind of emphasize here, after emphasizing it over at InsideNebraska.com as well, just how important of an addition this is, and just how, I guess, big of an addition this is for the tight end group. This is a prospect that Penn State keyed in on as the next Tyler Warren. They pitched him on the Tyler Warren role. At one point, Miami, he's had a ton of success with tight ends as of late. Just put out Elijah Arroyo into the draft. They wanted him badly. USC and UCLA both wanted him badly. There was a point in time where both Texas and Texas A&M were coming after him pretty hard. You had Nebraska battling Ole Miss as well, and a few other just power programs for a versatile athlete who knows exactly what he wants at the next level, is one of the best inline blocking tight ends in this 26 cycle with plenty of upside as a pass catcher, has the opportunity, in my opinion, to kind of start his career ready to go. I think year one, he's going to be a guy that you're going to see in 12 and 13 packages as an inline tight end, and a guy that as he gets more comfortable and as he learns the playbook, he's only going to see his role within the offense grow. He's a type of prospect that you can kind of feature within the offense, be a focal point of the offense. I think what a good comparison, in my opinion, is kind of what you're going to see from Heinrich Haarberg this year, what I expect Heinrich Haarberg to play, where he's going to line up in a bunch of different formations. There's going to be some, potentially some wildcat quarterback type stuff. You're going to see him maybe in the backfield, kind of leaking out, maybe from like a fullback position or even the running back position, leaking out of the backfield. I think there's just a lot of creativity and a lot of variety with a skill set like Sorensen's. And obviously Harburg as well is the guy currently on campus Nebraska sees in that role. But getting a guy that's been playing the tight end position for a while, has the multi-sport athleticism they look for, and is already standing 6'4", 245 pounds. Is probably going to enroll right around 250 pounds. Can play at that weight. Can hold that weight pretty well, and is just a junkie in the gym. You love those type of players. Nebraska loves those type of players. And it's a big deal for Nebraska to land a talent like him. And so yeah, and I think you can look at the stats. You can be a little probably concerned by his junior stats. He did play in a system that was pretty run heavy due to some shaky quarterback play out there in Anaheim. But he does play against some of the best competition in the country out there in the Trinity League in Southern California. And this year, heading into his senior year, he's expected to be a focal piece of that offense. So I'd expect his role, his numbers, everything to just improve here as a senior. And now we're looking at, as this is coming out on Monday, Nebraska awaits the decision of 3-star running back Jamal Rule. They're battling Virginia Tech, Syracuse, and Michigan State for him. Huskers are well positioned there, but we'll see if a late surge pulls a 3-star away from the Huskers. And they also wait the decision of 4-star cornerback Danny Odom, the number 8 cornerback and a top 75 prospect per Rivals. Odom's deciding between Nebraska, Oklahoma, Clemson, Ohio State and Penn State is the final five. He's had a bunch of changes in that recruitment as of late. Ultimately, do think this comes down to Nebraska, Oklahoma. I do think Clemson lurks a little bit. I do think they're a program worth monitoring here as we enter the final hours of this recruitment before he announces his decision. But there's some confidence out of Norman. There's some confidence out of Nebraska right now. Intel suggests I just kind of am leaning Nebraska, just coming off of the last visit he made was Nebraska. He visited with his teammate, four-star safety Devin Jackson, and Nebraska is really the only school recruiting both of those guys together, kind of keep trying to keep those two together at this point. Plus the fact that you added that he's been peer recruited by Trey Taylor, his 7-on-7 teammate, his other 7-on-7 teammate, four-star wide receiver Larry Miles, was also on campus this past weekend. I think it bodes well for Nebraska, but I am quite wary of Oklahoma and to a certain extent Clemson's presence as well here in the final hours before he announces his final decision. With official visits done, I do kind of want to reflect a little bit, kind of zoom out a little bit. We've done this a little bit already, but zoom out a little bit and look at the where things kind of stand at with Nebraska at some key positions. You look at quarterback, they got their quarterback committed. Dayton Raiola's in, he's not going anywhere. Running back, they wait the decision of Jamal Rule. If that goes, in a different direction, I think running back is all of a sudden a real big position of need and something Nebraska is going to have to address. In these final few months of this 2026 cycle. They missed out on Zephyr Walker. He committed to Oklahoma over Nebraska. I don't feel good about where they stand with four-star running back Brian Bonner either. Rule is kind of the only guy left on the current board. Or if Nebraska does miss out on Rule, I do imagine they expand the board a little bit. Wide receiver recruiting has seen its, kind of twists and turns this cycle, but I do think Nebraska is well positioned to round out the class very well. They've got a pretty young group of receivers on campus right now. I can't imagine they're looking to add more than three maximum wide receivers to the room. They this past weekend they hosted four-star wide receiver Nan Scott, currently committed to Arizona State. Nebraska is well positioned to flip him coming out of the weekend. They previously had him on campus back in April, and that's why. And after that visit, we'd actually first reported that he was planning to return for an official visit on this June 20th weekend. But then he made that kind of shocking early commitment to Arizona State after a late April official visit down to Tempe, and ended up canceling all of his remaining official visits. And so Nebraska never got, or was initially not expected to get that shot. Credit to Jaquil Shorts, stayed relentless, was able to get him back on campus this past weekend. And now they're well positioned to kind of pull off the flip, kind of steal one away from Kenny Dillingham and Hines Ward, who, if that name rings a bell, he's the wide receivers coach down there at Arizona State. So would be a big win for Nikhil Shorts as he kind of starts to kind of settle down and set some roots in Nebraska coming out of his time at Kentucky. I also think Nebraska's well positioned with four-star wide receiver Larry Miles, who made his official visit this weekend. Miles is a 7-on-7 teammate of Danny Odom and Devin Jackson, plays for 24K down there in Orlando. He made a midweek visit to Nebraska early in June, earned an offer while on campus, quickly turned around and scheduled the June 20th official visit, and now leaves that official visit pretty high on Nebraska. I do think this recruitment is not done just yet. He's set to announce his commitment on July 1st, but I do like where Nebraska stands as we enter these final few days of his recruitment. And then, they hosted Zion Robinson last week. That's kind of like a flyer out of Mansfield, four-star wide receiver out of Texas. Nebraska's battling Michigan, Stanford, TCU, and a few others for. I do think that's ultimately going to come down to Michigan, Stanford, Nebraska in the mix. We're going to get more from him at this Rivals five-star camp. And so I expect more from him just coming out of that visit. That was one of those things that Nebraska worked hard to get him on campus, was able to get one shot at it. I don't know if that one shot is going to be enough, but at this point, again, I don't think they're taking more than three. If it ended up just being Scott and Miles, I think you feel pretty good about the room moving forward. Adding those two guys to a room that is already really young with Isaiah Mosey, Cortez Mills, Shakori Barney, Quinn Clark, Carter Nelson, so on and so forth. There's a lot in that room. Carter Nelson, of course, now a tight end, but so on and so forth. It's a good looking room with pass catchers, and I do think you also have to factor in Luke Sorensen, the tight end commit, as a pass catcher slash offensive weapon, more so than just a traditional tight end. I think he's going to be a factor in the pass game, and I do think Nebraska sees him as kind of the extension of the passing game as well. Offensive line, they already hold the commitments of Hayden Ainsworth and Rex Waterman. They're waiting the decisions of Claude and Puma, who visited this past weekend. We've got some intel on that over at InsideNebraska.com. Nebraska is battling Florida, Auburn, Michigan, and Ohio State. By the time we put out this next week's show, he's going to have made his decision. Nebraska feels good kind of coming out of the official visit, but be sure to go check out Inside Nebraska for some additional intel on that recruitment. Nebraska also hosted four-star Syracuse commit Javion Cooper, more of an interior prospect, but has the versatility to play tackle as well. Nebraska is working to flip away from the orange. They're working to um, also battled Colorado, Florida State, UCF, a few other programs involved trying to flip him away from his current commitment to Syracuse. And that's kind of just a wait and see one. I think Nebraska made a strong first impression. It was his first visit. That's a recruitment I could see playing into the fall. I could see him coming back for a game, maybe two in the fall, just to see what Nebraska has to offer from an in-game environment as well. And so yeah, line is something that I think is going to be a work in progress, but you feel pretty good with the two additions they already have. Like I mentioned, they kind of wait the decision of Impuma. I think if you're able to land a blue chip offensive tackle like an Impuma or potentially come from behind with a Kelvin Obot, you feel really good about where the offensive line is at, where the depth's at. In the cycle and moving forward, defensive line I think is a key position of need, something Nebraska is going to have to address. They're just in a weird position there. Hosted Valdenstone this month. Weren't able to get James Carrington on campus, and Sone's one that he's kind of all over the place. And I the more I think about it, the more I think that recruitment's eventually going to push into the fall unless he does make an early commitment. And if that does happen, I do think Georgia's the school, like I mentioned, in a couple of spots at this point. Georgia's the school I think that is best positioned to land him if you were to make an early decision. But if he pushes the decision into the fall, I think anything can happen. Nebraska's invested a lot of energy in that recruitment, put in a lot of legwork to kind of get over some of the hurdles that a program like Georgia or Texas doesn't really have to clear to make Stone feel like a priority. So we'll see what happens there. I do think an expansion of the board is needed, or I just think there just needs to be a little time there to let things sit, figure out kind of how they want to adjust moving forward there. Jackson, other position. I'm just intrigued to see how Nebraska addresses moving forward. They worked really hard to flip Cameron Wilson away from Syracuse. I'm not saying that's not going to happen. But he made an official visit to Syracuse last weekend, and then he returned to Syracuse unofficially this past weekend, canceling a previously scheduled official visit to Florida State. So the good news is, if anyone's positioned to flip Wilson away, it's Nebraska. The bad news is I think Syracuse has done enough over the past 2 weeks to make him feel comfortable in that commitment, even though it is so far from home, though it is an ACC school, compared to an SEC or Big Ten program. Then, we've talked plenty about, kind of where the future of college football is going, how much that really matters. But yeah, just kind of moving forward, I'm interested to see how Nebraska addresses Jack. I do imagine Philip Simpson has his kind of fair share of options out there. I think he's going to address that position well, and I do think that's something that's just going to get addressed as Nebraska gets onto the field in the fall and starts to play a little football. Linebacker. Another one, you're just kind of in wait and see mode. They're playing catch up with Case and Thomas. They are for now out of the mix for Jordan Campbell, but that's one that I could see Nebraska try and get back in the mix in the fall. I think linebacker and Jack linebacker and even defensive line right now is just kind of in wait and see mode. Just to kind of see how the summer progresses, where some of these dominoes fall, and also how they can potentially expand the board. Is it expanding it to already established recruits? Is it finding some late hidden gems? I don't think Nebraska is specifically along the defensive line. I don't think Nebraska is in a position to kind of take some swings right now. They need to find established talent. You talk about a guy like Veldon Stone. That's a guy that could come in day one and play at Nebraska. Nebraska needs to find those kind of guys this cycle, and I just don't know how many of them there are right now that are currently available to them. So I'm very interested to see how Nebraska does address the line moving forward. I do feel solid about the secondary just as that continues to develop. I think Addison Williams has plenty of options. Like we mentioned, they await the decision of Danny Odom, who's set to announce his decision later today. Devin Jackson, his teammate, who we talked about at the top of the show, awaiting his decision as well. He's deciding between Oregon, Miami, Florida still involved, LSU still involved. And I do think this is going to come down to Nebraska, Oregon, and Florida. He was previously committed to the Gators, and they have kind of made it known to him that he still has a spot in the class if he wants it. They do still really want him. He's one of the top targets for Addison Williams, and you turn on the tape, and there's a good reason for that. He's a highly instinctual safety that can play all over the secondary. Someone I think can be a future leader in Nebraska's defense should he commit to Nebraska. Nebraska's really waiting the decision of those two. They also await the decision of Darian Jones, the in-state cornerback, who's ultimately, I think, going to decide between Iowa and Nebraska. He set a decision date for July 4th. You've got a few more DBs out there. Nebraska hosted Tadarius Hughes for a visit last weekend. He's currently committed to Florida State, made an official visit to Syracuse over the weekend. Nebraska just keeps finding themselves in these Florida State and Syracuse battles. There's a reason for that. There's a lot of familiarity between all three staffs. Obviously, you've got Tony White and Terrence Knighton and Evan Cooper on Florida State's defensive staff up at Syracuse. You've got Elijah Robinson, a former Matt Rule assistant, as the defensive line coach. Nebraska also, Rule also has a good relationship with Fran Brown, has a good relationship with a few coaches over there, and so there's a reason these three schools keep finding themselves in recruiting battles against each other. But Nebraska's trying to flip Hughes away from Florida State. Have to also fend off Syracuse a little bit. Syracuse is making a pretty serious run to flip him away as well. So those are some of the big names really left at defensive back, and you've got Jacob Eberhardt as well, the nickel out of Kirkwood. But I think that one's going to go a different direction. Oklahoma's in the mix, Missouri's in the mix. Illinois is in the mix as well. And so that's kind of where things currently stand. Of course, Nebraska also lost the commitment of CJ Bronaugh last week. Didn't came as a bit of a surprise to Nebraska. It was one of those things where they felt good after he made his official visit back to Nebraska. And ultimately just came down to the opportunity to stay closer to home. I do think Florida got a little aggressive from an NIL standpoint as well. Got him back on campus for a surprise midweek on an official visit and were able to secure his commitment a few hours later. Again, a tough one for Nebraska, but on the flip side of things, if things go their way with Danny Odom and Devin Jackson, you feel pretty good about where the secondary class is currently at. And so that's kind of just laying things out where things kind of stand in 2026 coming out of official visit season. Again, Nebraska's working in a numbers crunch. They are a little limited in terms of how many people they can add. Again, if they did, we're dealing with this numbers crunch. I think you see a few more people already in the class. I think you potentially also see um, them taking more swings at certain positions. I just at this point with kind of the roster crunch they kind of face, they're just in a position where the guys they add have to be impact type guys, or for sure, like 3-4 years down the line, we develop this guy and we can see him contributing at some point. They can't just take blind swings. They've never really done that. The Matt Rule has never really taken blind swings before, but there's been times in previous cycles where they've taken a swing on the guy and you kind of have to squint to see it and have to be like, okay, well, this is a guy that's going to be ready 3-4 years down the line. They can't really afford too many of those this cycle. So yeah, and honestly, I mean, I've said this before, and I've said this in a few places as well, but the key with the 26 class is Nebraska just has to get some results on the field. It comes down to that. They're doing the best they can without those results, with what they do have, which is one of the best facilities in the country, and some pretty strong NIL resources, and a pretty strong team culture as well. I think that's something people kind of underestimate or discount when they talk about recruiting in this day and age. But that stuff matters. You listen to recruits talk about their time at Nebraska on official visits, and it's a lot of team bonding. It's a lot of getting to know the current players and really starting to feel at home. You feel it specifically all along the offensive line. Those guys are really tight knit, and it is just starting to kind of seep across the entire roster. And that's something that, again, like in this NIL era, I think it's why I think Nebraska is well positioned if they start to get some wins on the field to retain their roster at a high clip, and also be able to kind of land at a high clip and recruit at a very high level because they do have the combination. There's a lot of pieces there. It just kind of hasn't all come together. The biggest missing piece right now is the on-field success, and if that comes in the fall, and we've talked about it plenty, that there's a feeling within the program that it is. If it does happen in the fall, Nebraska does finally kind of break through. I do think this 26 class is going to take care of themselves. And honestly, I don't say that kind of, I know that kind of sounds like I'm, preparing you guys for bad news, but that's not the case at all. I do think it's going to be a good July for Nebraska. I do think these next few weeks are going to be pretty productive for Nebraska on the recruiting trail. And I do think they're going to end the summer in a much better position with this 26 class than they currently stand in. But that'll probably do it for us. We appreciate you guys tuning in, kind of shooting this here in Indianapolis. The finals on in the background as well. Kind of keeping an eye on that as Game 7 progresses. And yeah, we'll have coverage from Rivals 5-star this week. We'll have some coverage on, kind of some future commitments, any potential other decisions that come Nebraska's way, and a lot more just coming out of June. I think there's a lot to sit back and think on and reflect on coming out of June. And so, yeah, we'll have all of that coverage over at InsideNebraska.com. Be sure to tune in. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and be sure to check out our work over at InsideNebraska.com. We really appreciate it. And if you want to subscribe to us at InsideNebraska.com, I know that's it's a cost over there, but we would really appreciate that too. Like I've mentioned it on every show at this point, but I do this show once a week, but I put up daily recruiting intel over at InsideNebraska.com for our subscribers. So be sure to check all of that out. We appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll be back next week.